Hey folks, so we are back again working on the quilted butterfly blocks for the on point layout of the Hoop Sisters flower bouquet. Well, sampler bouquet, I should say. So we have already done the 20 quilted butterfly blocks, the 4 quilted corner blocks, and we have also done the 3 quilted butterfly blocks for the bottom. Now we are going to be working on the ones for the top. We are also going to be making 3 of these. So here we are. This is the block. It is going to be the same exact process that we did for the bottom. And as I mentioned in the previous video, we are just going to be noticing it by the layout. So if you've already watched that video, great, but if you've not, let's point out some things. We are going to be making several different quilted blocks. Most of them are butterflies. There are some corner blocks that we are going to be making that do not include the butterflies, but everything else does. These are our dimension sizes based off the size of the squares that we are making. So for today's block, again, we are going to be making the top quilted butterfly blocks. If you are doing the 5-inch block, it is roughly going to be a 4.9 by 4.9 finished block. And if we are making the 8-inch squares, we are going to have a 7 3/4 by 7 3/4 block. So we are going to just kind of flip on over here and we're going to look at cutting. So just like before, we are going to be cutting our blocks into half square triangle. So for the bottom, the top, the left, and the right half square triangles, we are going to be cutting them again into half square triangles. So we cut them on the diagonal. So we are going to cut a total of 7, and this will be enough for all of these, okay? So we are going to be making a grand total of 14 triangles in this same size. So when cutting, notice that you are going to be cutting your background fabric here, and this is if you were doing the optional back. Also, if you were doing the optional additional piece of wool, you're going to cut there. So here we have what we're going to cut our fabric to. I typically like to cut mine about a 1/2 inch larger. So I would normally cut this like 10.5 by 11 instead of 10 by 10. Or if I was doing the 6.5 by 6.5, I would probably cut them at least 7 inches. And so what we're going to have in order to get the angle is we're going to have 2 pieces because we are going to have a square and we are going to cut it in half from corner to corner. Now, if you were doing this on battleizer, you do not need to do what I have here because you're just going to hoop your battleizer. But if you've been following along in the series, I am using no show mesh, and I have taken my batting. I am using a blend of 100% cotton, and I am also using cotton poly 80-20 cotton poly batting as well. And so when I'm cutting my batting for it, I again cut a square to the same size and I slit it in half on an angle. So whenever I'm cutting my batting to go behind my background, I am cutting it to the exact specifications of my background fabric, and it will also, I could cut it the way it's recommending for the optional wool. So just keep that in mind when you're cutting along. If you've been following along, you already know that I recommend writing down what thread colors you are using to quilt with, as well as what thread colors that you're using for your butterflies. So as I have been showing off before, I am using exquisite thread color number ES165 for all of my quilting through the entirety of both quilt layouts. And I am using ES392 as my purple for all of my quilted butterfly blocks. So we've got those, we've got these. Let's mosey on over to the machine and let's get stitching. So you are going to make a grand total of 3 of these. You can fit multiples in the hoop depending on your hoop size. So let's go over here and let's look at putting in multiple in the hoop. So I have 2 here because I have a 10 5/8 by 18-inch hoop on the Brother Avenir. I also have a Janome CM17 beside me that has a hoop that is a very, very similar size. So I can do 2 in a hooping, but I'd like to show you guys how you can rotate them and kind of put them together if you have a smaller hoop. Bear with me, I'm putting on my ES165 real quick, my quilting thread color, real fast to kind of get the day going. So let's talk about setting these up to make it for a smaller hoop size. So what I do is I pull up the design, and again, this is going to be the one that is labeled, I'm going to show that off real quick. It's labeled as the top. So basically quilted border butterfly top. So be sure you're pulling up that exact file. It will matter. So let's talk about editing this to rotate it. So I pull up the block and then I make a copy. Then what I can do is come in here and edit, and I can rotate my block and I can scoot them closer together because, as you can see, they are on the angle, and so there's just that overlap. So if you have a hoop that's around 8.5 by 8.5, you can fit these and still have that nice little gap. So if you have a 9.5-inch hoop as your, like, one of the hoops that you want to use, or if you want to use your 10 by 8s, or if you, like I said, if you have an 8, something close to that parameters, you can get these blocks closer together. Now I'm not doing that today because I've got this big beautiful hoop on, and I'm going to use it. So I'm just going to spread these apart because that is just the way that I like to do things. But if you are working with battleizer, especially, and you want to try to conserve as much of that as possible, I'm just trying to show you a way that you can. So I'm just kind of spreading these apart as best as I can, just to give them some distance. And then we're just going to hit OK, and we're going to go into embroidery. Now, several machines have a feature called color sort. So the way that it's set up right now, it would do all of the top block, then it's going to do all of the bottom block, or vice versa. What I can do is, here on this screen, there is a feature called color sort. Several different brands have something similar, but you can activate that, and instead of you doing one step at a time through each block, it's going to do the layout for all of this part. So it would do this step, which is kind of like our outline for the additional piece of batting, and then it would do it for the block down here. So that's kind of nice, but it does kind of throw you off if you're trying to follow the step-by-step instructions. So just keep that in mind, that the numbers will be different, and I'm not doing that because we're just going to stitch one of these out together. I am going to stitch both in one hooping, but I just kind of wanted you guys to see a recommendation and just another way that you can kind of conserve what you have. Now, if you are doing like I am, I have a piece of no-show mesh stabilizer hooped, and I am using my leftover bits, and I have in my bottom a just regular 60-way embroidery bobbin. Now, depending on the way you're doing things, you can use the Vanish light thread for your placement stitches to kind of get them out later. And the instructions are great for that because they're going to tell you exactly when you need to change your bobbins and when you need to change your top thread to the Vanish light and back to your regular embroidery thread. That is if you are doing the additional optional back. We are not doing that, but I will try to make mentions of that as we progress. So first things first, no matter which method you're doing, you're going to sew the very first machine stitch step, or stitch sequence, or whatever you'd like to call it. And that is going to give us our outline for our piece of batting, no matter what we're doing. So if we're using battleizer, it's going to stitch it directly onto the battleizer, and then there's nothing else crazy you have to do. Now, I am using no-show mesh, and because I'm doing multiple hoopings, I'm stitching directly onto the stabilizer so I can see where I need to lay my batting. Now, it does do a zigzag stitch next, and that is for those of you that are going to be using the additional optional wool batting. Now, you can skip that step because it does a pretty decent size zigzag stitch. Or what I normally like to do is go back and repeat machine stitch step 1 to tack this down. And I've done that in 2 other videos talking about the quilted butterflies. But if you were doing the battleizer or you're doing the additional optional wool, I just kind of want you to see what the zigzag stitch looks like. So I am going to stitch that on this. It's not going to hurt anything. It's just, I want you guys to see how it looks. Now, if you're using the Trimmer by George ruler, you're not going to trim this yet. You would wait. Now, if you're trimming as you go, like I am, I would probably just come back here with scissors and knock that out, just because we want to reduce our batting bulk. And see, it didn't catch super great up top. That is one of the reasons that I normally like to cut my half square triangles and my quarter square triangles, the original block, about a 1/2 inch to a full inch bigger, because it does make a difference later on, especially when we're working with angles, because they get kind of biasy. So that's machine stitch step 2 that you would put down if you're doing the additional optional wool. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our piece of background fabric. I'm using a batik. So we're just going to take and we are going to lay that over top of everything. And we're going to try to not unthread our needle while we lay it on top of everything. And I'm just going to scoot that around until I feel like there's a decent little amount of overhang on all the sides. And then use embroidery tape and tape down if you feel like you need it, especially if you're not used to placing fabrics down. I would highly recommend that, because I'd rather you sew over your fabric and goof it up than sew over your fingers. Perfect. So now we are going to be done with the tack down of all the fabric pieces. Now, if you are going to be adding the additional optional back, what we're going to do here is we're going to take the hoop off the machine. We're going to flip it over to the back side. We're going to grab our preferred brand of embroidery tape, and we are going to take our background fabric or the backing fabric we have cut, and we're going to lay it over top of all those edges, nice and smooth, and tape it down. We're also going to change our bobbin thread here to match whatever color we are quilting with. So depending on what you're doing as far as that goes, for whatever you're quilting with and what you've chose to put on the back side, this is where you would change that bobbin. Then we're going to flip it back over and slide it on the machine. I am not doing that method. I am doing it where we're going to add the we're doing the option where we can put the whole back piece on after everything is done. But I do try to make notations of that. And then we're going to lower our foot and we're going to start and we're going to sew machine stitch step 4. Now, if you are doing this, I would like to point out that it does sew the butterflies on last. And if you are doing this with the additional optional back, all that stitching is going to be seen on the back side. Now, the pattern manufacturers from Hoop Sisters do make a mention of this. They talk about it right here in step 5 about when the butterfly gets stitched down. So pay special attention to this step. Now, here's me. This is what I would probably do, because that's just me. I would probably skip ahead to machine stitch step 5 and sew the butterfly before I flipped it over and added my back, and then I would skip back to machine stitch step 4 and then stitch the optional quilting. That is just what I would do for me if I was doing it that way. I can only, base that off what my personal preference is, but if you're wanting to follow the manufacturer's instructions on the optional quilted back, she does make a mention of that in machine stitch step 5. So just keep that in mind while you're sewing this out, that if you want to omit that and you want to skip over it, you probably want to do the butterfly before it does the quilting, because it always does the quilting before the butterfly on all of the butterfly blocks. That's for the ones that are square and all of the triangles. Sorry if I knocked the camera. I was just trying to get my purple ready to go for our butterflies here in a minute. Now, like with all of these blocks, they go very, very quickly. So this butterfly is just going to be just like the one that was for the bottom. It's just the angle that the fabric is cut on is going to be the same. Now, the standard quilted butterfly block, the top and the bottom quilted butterfly blocks are all going to have the butterflies with open wings. So this is going to be an open winged butterfly block. When you do the corner blocks, those are your only blocks that are going to not have butterflies. For the on-point layout, they're just going to be quilted. And then for the left and right butterfly blocks, those are actually going to be half-winged butterfly. Well, not half-winged, but it's going to be like the butterfly is flapping its wings so the wings are closed. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the very last couple of blocks of this. But just like with the other butterfly blocks, when it does the quilting, it kind of leaves a silhouette of the butterfly open. So that makes me think that it would be safe to go ahead and stitch the butterfly first, because it almost even gives this trapunto-y effect that kind of looks a little puckery almost. So I feel like there's enough slack there that it may pull some of the stitching a little closer to the butterfly, but you have to make that choice based on your personal preference if you want that butterfly to be seen on the back or not. Now, we're going to change the threads before the last step, which is machine stitch step 5. That is the only time I change thread colors through this whole thing. And we're going to switch over to our purple. Bear with me while I thread this up. There we go. And we're going to sew out the 5th step. And again, I am using 100% polyester embroidery top thread. It is a 40 weight. This is exquisite color number ES392. It is their standard purple. And for the thread that I'm using for all of my quilting is exquisite thread color number ES165. I do like to point that out. I also sew this with a 9014 embroidery needle. I feel like the needle is a little heavier. It's a little sturdier. I don't have issues with breaking the needles. I don't feel like my stitches skip or anything just because I'm working with a slightly heavier needle. I know a lot of people work with 7511s, and I'm not knocking that. If you succeed with that, go with it, girl. Whatever works. But if you're having some issues with the stitching or you're breaking needles or anything like that, I would recommend switching to a higher needle. A higher gauge of needle, I should say. And sewing needles are backwards to surgical needles when it comes to sizing. So with the needles, the higher the number, the thicker the needle. But make sure you are using embroidery ones as you go. So just like on all the other butterfly blocks, it's going to create the outline silhouette of the entire butterfly before it does anything else. So it's going to stitch out the wings, the antenna, and then it's going to do the satin stitch on the top of the antenna, and then it's going to do that nice decorative body fill. And there are 5 steps per, and again, you're going to make 3 blocks of these as we go. Where I am doing this, I can't tell you like the total stitch count out, but I will make a mention of that before we finish out today. Also, I do try to mention this in every video. Have extra bobbins ready. If you are using the Vanish Light, have a bobbin of the Vanish Light on you. If you are doing the optional where you have the colors in the bobbin for the quilting to match, and the same on the butterfly, have a bobbin of those ready to go with you. And I have had several embroidery bobbins. I've just changed it for this last one. So I had 4, now I'm down to 3, but we want to keep plenty of those on stock so we don't worry about running out of those at any given time. Because you are going to make an absolute ton of the quilted butterfly blocks. So as soon as it finishes the silhouette, it's going to come back up to the antennae, and it is going to stitch out that lovely satin stitch. It's just a quick little satin stitch it does. And then it's going to move straight over into the body of the butterfly, which is really pretty. I do love the texture. I think I've mentioned that on every video about how much I like the texture print that they put for the body of the butterfly, because it's just a nice crisp weave. While we're waiting on that to finish stitching out, I'll go ahead and show what I'm talking about. So the body of the butterfly has like almost this crosshatch design that's kind of embossed using just the purple thread. It's just the technique and the way it's digitized into it, and it gives a really nice trapunto-ish effect to the entire block with the beautiful feather quilting, and then with your butterfly. But I promise we're getting close to done. I bet it's trying to thread nest underneath me. It made a noise. But we finished, so we're going to count our victories where we got them. So now you're going to go ahead and you are going to make 3 blocks of these in total. And so if you've been following along, you're going to have 4 of the quilted corner blocks. You're going to have 3 of the top blocks and bottom blocks after this video. And then you're going to have your 20 regular square quilted butterfly blocks. So we've just got the left and right left to go if you were doing the quilted butterflies on point layout. We hope to see you for those videos. You guys have a great rest of your day. Until next time, happy sewing. Bye-bye.